I want the general public to be able to taste something that chefs might already know about. But, not everyone can afford to go out to some of these great restaurants or they just don't do it. That's not what they do. So I want them to be able to experience what a chef can be doing in a restaurant.
This is The Producers. I'm Anthony Huckstep. For 3 generations, Greg Kocanda's family have been producing organic fruit and vegetables on farms in New South Wales Central West and the Hawksbury. Organics isn't a marketing catch cry for the Kocandas of Block 11 Organics. It's simply the only way they have ever farmed.
We began in the Hawksbury in Richmond. My grandfather came to Australia in 1939 to a property that had been purchased by some cousins of his. So he came out specifically to be a market gardener. And it's right on the Hawksbury River that runs through Richmond. And there's 7 metres of topsoil there, and it's an amazing property unless you get a flood, which has happened to us recently. But it's just great dirt. It's a fantastic winter growing area. It gets a bit different in summer when we've got a lot of humidity and very hot temperatures. But that's where Orange sort of comes into its own. So we've been living in Orange for 14 years, and prior to that, I was in Canowindra. So I basically left the Hawkesbury to go and do some agronomy sales work for elders. So I was working with farmers and selling them seed, fertiliser and chemical, and I did that for 10 years. And then we moved up to Orange when the kids had to move schools and stuff like that. And I wasn't basically in the business at Richmond for a while. I bought another property in Canowindra and started farming there. But then after we moved up into Orange, we sort of stopped farming there and was more Richmond Orange, and which is where we're at now. A lot of what we grow in winter in Richmond, we can continue to grow in summer in Orange, because Orange is 1,100 metres above sea level. And we're 15 metres at Richmond. So the temperature is really good and unique for growing a lot of that winter stuff through summer in Orange. We don't have the water supply in Orange that we do in Richmond, but there's enough water here now for a couple of years after the rain this year. And even last year we had some good rain. So we're set up for a few years in Orange. And in Richmond, it's a little bit the opposite, because we had a big flood this year. Warragamba's full, so if we get a decent rain event, that could all happen again. So we're hoping it doesn't happen.
For Greg, farming runs through his veins. It all started with his grandfather in the late 1930s, who didn't have access to chemicals or fertilisers, so he rolled up his sleeves and chose to grow seasonally.
So my grandfather started it all when he came out in 1939. My grandmother followed. She arrived in Australia in 1940, I think, with an uncle, and then Dad was born here and 2 other children followed, and it basically became a family business. As everyone got older, they basically worked on the farm, and to begin with, so it all worked back through the old market in Sydney. So my grandfather would sell the produce from the stand in the old hay markets. And the way it worked was they had 2 trucks. So on a Sunday, he would go down with a load of vegetables, and then he would actually stay in Sydney for the whole week. He had a room in a hotel down there called the Hampton, Dad told me, on George Street. I don't think it's there any longer. But and then, every day the boys would just drive a truck down that had a load on it, and then come back and reload it for the next day. So it was a bit different in those days. No cool rooms, no pallets, no forklifts. So everything was done by hand. So the shopkeepers would even come in and just buy what they needed for that day, and the next day they'd be back there to fill orders or buy whatever else they wanted for the shop. And that's how the old market worked. And that's where it's just changed so dramatically these days. My grandfather was really renowned for his cauliflowers. So you'd grow a 12-week, a 14-week, a 16-week and an 18-week cauliflower. So they were a big part of winter, but they still grew carrots and parsnips and potatoes. because the transport was so different back in those days, everything had to be more or less local. Unless you were near a train line, you couldn't get it into Sydney quickly, and no refrigeration. So back in the day, the Sydney Basin grew just about all crops that could be grown through that season, whereas that's what's changed these days. You can grow it just about anywhere, and within 24 hours you can have it into one of the major markets, Sydney, Brisbane or Melbourne.
Access to life on the farm made a huge impact on Greg's connections to the land and importance of quality produce.
Every Sunday we would have a family roast chicken lunch down at the farm. I didn't actually live at the farm, but we were only 2 kilometres away when I was growing up. But every Sunday our whole family, so all my cousins, my aunts and uncles, would be down there, and it'd pretty much always be a roast chicken with some potatoes and parsnips and whatever else was going on the farm at the moment. And then, we'd get a bit of sweet potato brought in every now and then, which was a bit different. But it was really good. It was a real family affair, and so that was one part of it. But then another part was, being the European family. We were doing pigs on the spit, lambs on the spit, and all the things that have become trendy we were doing back in the day when I was younger. So, and I also remember going to delis with Mum, being dragged along, and, we were the only kids in there, and there wasn't many people. Only the European people would be going in there. But again, now they're just so trendy as well, all the small goods and everything associated with them.
Although it was in the family, it wasn't until Greg returned from his studies that he realised the potential to take the family farm into a new era.
Well, early on, Dad was part of the business, so he grew the stuff. Well, he did everything, basically. They irrigated it, they looked after it. But as we were growing up, Dad wasn't actually on the farm. The family partnership sort of broke up a little bit, and so Dad actually got into trucks. So virtually all the way through school, we were really not farming until towards the end of my high school, when Dad was sort of doing it as a bit of a hobby, believe it or not, just growing a few things. Yeah. So, and that's probably when I first got a little bit interested in it. But up until that time, I was the only kid at school off a farm that wasn't doing ag. So, yeah, and really, didn't have that much interest in it, believe it or not. But I went off to uni in Armidale, and I learned a little bit about economics and a lot about life when I was up there. And then I basically dropped out of uni and came home, and there wasn't too many options. The farm was there. Dad was still dabbling just a little bit with it, and I said, come on, let's do it. So we sort of got going and started growing cauliflowers and corn and watermelons and pumpkins, and I think that's what hooked me. But I also love food. I think that's hooked me as well, and just being able to have a say and know where our food comes from is pretty important as well to me. So, but it's a bit of an addiction now. Everything's just all about food, and not necessarily just what we're growing, but what other people are doing. I just love it.
Growing organic produce has allowed Greg to diversify his offering, create small lines of unique products that are not suited to mass production and that many people no longer get access to in the large supermarkets.
We bought our block in Kocanda, which was certified organic in around 2000, and the block that I got was block number 11. That's how simple it is. So we just called it block 11. And the main reason I bought it was because I could grow a small amount of produce and still be able to market it, which would be very hard to do in the conventional market. Probably there's a couple of challenges. One of the biggest challenges is the fact that the market is so small. So there's not a lot of volume unless you want to go into the supermarkets, and that's that's not a path I want to go down. And one of the biggest challenges for me growing are probably just the weeds. Keeping on top of the weeds, we're forever trying to work out how to stay on top of those, especially in wet years when there's sometimes you can't get back onto the ground to get rid of a weed, germination. So yeah, we're forever working on that. So about around 08, 07, I think we moved up into Orange. But Kocanda is only 50 kilometres south of where we are. But one reason we sort of decided not to continue farming down there is because it's 300 metres above sea level, a very similar climate to Richmond, and water availability was becoming a bit of an issue down there. And then I just, being at Orange, it put us a bit closer to Richmond, and we sort of started going in that direction. We thought there was more advantage going down there, and definitely a softer winter, which definitely helps what we do.
It's not just the organic farming methods and relationship with the land and environment that drives Greg. It's the interesting and often rare produce he dabbles in.
So one of the most interesting lines we're currently doing is probably some tomatoes that we grow, which are bred by a guy in San Francisco from a place called Wild Ball Farms. They're all different colours, darks, yellows, like black darks, purples. But the thing I really like about them is the texture and then the flavour. They just stay firm. I don't think I've had a flowery one. So, the biggest problem we've got with them is just being able to grow enough. We basically just can't grow enough because then I'd have to become a tomato grower and I just don't want to do just tomatoes. It's a little bit too much risk and there's a fair bit involved in them. We started growing some Italian lines like the Chimi d'Arapa, some little baby turnips. There's just lots of different pumpkins, which are really taking off as well. Look, I look at a lot of different crops, but the way I get them over the line to plant them is they've got to eat well. And then even look, we've got the apple trees here in Orange, and we've got a variety up here called Sundowner, which isn't really an heirloom variety. It's actually half of what a pink lady is, and the supermarkets just don't want it. But it's an amazing apple. It's rock hard. It's got beautiful flavour. It doesn't go flowery. It's everything we grow is more about flavour. We taste it. I'll be walking through the paddock and just tasting stuff. That's just what I do. And sometimes people just look at me and say, you're wasting that. Well, I am, but I'm not. And sometimes someone will ask me about the flavour in a carrot or something, and I just say, not this week. They're not good enough. We had too much rain so it comes down to definitely how stuff eats for me. And I don't think you're going to get that in too many other places, like definitely not the supermarkets. They're all about how it looks.
The relationships fostered with chefs and consumers who care where their food comes from drives Greg to explore new varieties and new lines.
We've pretty much gone the full circle that my grandfather started. Well, he was direct marketing out of the central market, so we don't direct market out of the central market, but we do use an organic wholesaler in Sydney. And then, so he's a big part of what I call our main lines, which are just normal lines. Like he can't move the different tomatoes and the different lines, like the bunching Chimi d'Arapa and other little baby radishes and stuff. But where they go is they go down to Carriage Works, which is the only farmers market we do. And then we've also now got an online platform, and we also have a pretty good network of restaurant chefs. So when they get back and going, hopefully we'll have a fair bit of produce going to them. And that's allowed me to get into some of these niche lines where I can really push that flavour, taste aspect of what we're growing, and guys really love that, and especially if it's a bit different. I suppose there would be a limiting factor as to how much volume of those you could sell in a normal market through our normal wholesaler, because it would just be too hard for him. And one example of that is we grow this little Japanese pumpkin which is a kabocha, which I think is the Japanese word for pumpkin, but we call it a kabocha. It's a kabocha type of pumpkin. It's a beautiful, dry, sweet, nutty pumpkin. So we just cannot sell them wholesale through the wholesaler, but then we don't ever grow enough for our restaurant market business. So we're sort of pushing that where we can. There's a fine line in getting the volumes right for that business, because you can't just have a whole heap of it and expect you're going to move it. So there's no point growing lots of it and throwing half of it away. So, yeah, no, but marketing has become, it's a big job for us. It's a good job, but it just takes a lot of work and a lot of time on the phone, in front of a computer at night. And, I take a lot of calls from a lot of chefs, especially at the moment. It looks like we've got a bit of a light at the end of the tunnel with COVID, and it looks to be maybe an opening date. And so we're fielding a lot of phone calls about what we're going to have in 2-3 weeks' time, and how long for. So, which is all good news, because the other thing that's been really fantastic for us in one sense, from the first COVID lockdown, we set up an online platform, and we went direct to the door of our customers from Carriage Works. So and as soon as this second lockdown started, that just went triple to what we were doing, because we continued it even when we were opened up, just to keep the logistics going so we could be delivering to restaurants. But at the moment, it's killing us, the amount we're doing there, the hours involved in it, and just the extra work in, packing an order that wants a kilo of this, a kilo of that. It's a lot easier to do 10 boxes that are 15-kilo boxes of something, or 15, 20 bunches. So, but, it's been a real God-sent blessing having it there, and yeah, we'll continue with it, because there's customers that probably won't come back to the market. So, and like I said, it also then just gives us the logistics to the restaurants, which is what we want to be doing. And look, it's good to be able to talk to a chef. You can tell them about the different things you got, but sometimes they might want something that's not unusual, but they want it at a different stage, or they'll tell you what they're thinking. So it's really good to talk to those guys, but they can also make it difficult when they're showing you something that might be in the Northern Hemisphere, and I just know there's no way in the world we can get the seed over here.
Farmers markets have become the connective tissue for consumers looking to reconnect with the food they eat. But for Greg, that connection is vital to the success of everything he does.
It's become really important just because a lot of the networking we do down there now, there's a lot of people I've met down there that have given me contacts, including the guy that's going to edit this a bit later. He's been pretty amazing. So, but look, also on top of that, the customers there are just fantastic. The regulars, they come, they just refuse to go elsewhere to shop, and they just continue to come. And through this lockdown, with the 5K rule, we have just been so busy there. And the crazy part is, it's all these locals that didn't even know the thing existed. And it's only been there for 13 years, every Saturday, or most Saturdays anyway. So, but yeah, networking is one of the greatest things I've got out of it. And just, all the customers that, the regulars that we now know. And so the other thing I really like about it is I take stuff down there that's cooked, like different pumpkins, or we'll cut tomatoes up and say, try these. And you get feedback the next week, and 9 times out of 10 people just love what they're tasting, and they say, hey, thanks for telling me about it. And and yeah, like this year we're just going to have to be growing so many pumpkins, and that's only one crop I keep going back to, but there's other crops we sell down there. And one of the greatest advantages is at least you know how fresh it is. I know when I've picked it, I can tell them all about it. I will always push. It's one of the biggest problems we have with the market. We can't start harvesting too early, especially when the warmer months are here, because if the freshness if I get down the market and it just doesn't present well, chances are we're not going to sell it as much as we talk it up. So, just getting the story of the produce from me, and I'm not going to tell them a furphy about it, because if I do that and it's not up to what their expectations are, they're probably not going to come back and buy it. But in saying that, the regulars will come back, and, some regulars do come back and they say, oh, that was okay, but it wasn't great. But, that's sort of horses for courses, I suppose. But I think just knowing they know exactly how fresh it is. And look, I've worked with guys supplying the chains, and, sometimes the produce could be harvested 7 days before it's put on a shelf. And that definitely affects produce. No doubt about it. It might look good, but it won't taste as good. The classic example there is a cob of sweet corn. As soon as you pick that cob, the sugars start converting to starch, so you're not going to get the full flavour, probably the crispness out of the kernels, and it just becomes difficult. And yeah, something we just don't want to be selling. So, yeah, just getting the story straight from the grower and telling the truth. There'll be times where I say, hey, this is not good enough, especially to someone who might be supplying, boxes or someone supplying a restaurant that we don't go direct to. I'll just say, look, we've got carrots, but they're not for you this week. They're not up to what you want. And we can find another home for them.
Large-scale conventional farming has narrowed the lines of vegetables to a few variants of every type, meaning consumers are left with just a handful of eating experiences. Greg's mission to explore unique produce is opening up the culinary options to people's lives.
I want the general public to be able to taste something that chefs might already know about. But, not everyone can afford to go out to some of these great restaurants, or they just don't do it. That's not what they do. So I want them to be able to experience what a chef can be doing in a restaurant, and even then, ideally what we're pushing is we want the produce to be good enough so the chef turns his magic with the way he cooks it, but pretty much leaves it as it is. Like, he might just throw a pumpkin in a wood-fired oven and cut it in half and put that on the plate, do a couple of little things to it, but put it out there in almost its natural state. And, I just want people to be able to experience that. Because a lot of these different lines, you'll just never find them in the supermarket, because they're very difficult, not so much to grow, but to get the seed of some of these things. And that's probably one of the biggest headaches we've got at the moment, is just getting enough seed of some of these really good products. Like even today, I've sent an email to Italy chasing some genetics on some different greens, and so it'll be good. Yep, the guy might say he can send it, but then we've got to work out how we get it through customs. And then with a couple other things, there's no seed available anywhere in the world at the moment. So we've virtually had to turn into seed savers as well, if we want to continue with some of these lines that aren't hybrids, which is definitely what I want to do as well, but it's another job. So, but anyway, if it's a good enough product, we're definitely doing it. And there's quite a few. And one example is the tomatoes. We're not bringing in seeds out of the States all the time. And at the moment, I think you'd be very lucky to be able to bring anything in anyway, because customs are just all over everything. So, yeah. But no, I just think letting people experience, veg that they can't just go to the local store or even to Woolies or Coles and buy. You just want people to know what else is out there.
Farmers are always at the whim of Mother Nature, and drought and floods have taken their toll on Greg and his family. Recently, the floods threatened to turn everything that they do on its head.
So we lost about 9 acres of produce. 7 acres of it was corn, and just about every cob was probably sold if we got to pick it. So it was the first flood in 30 years. It lasted for 6 days, which Dad can't actually remember being a flood lasting that long. So it covered part of the farm with 1.5 meters of water, and basically everything that went under that water we never harvested. So in that regard, it was pretty tough. Look, it definitely affected us financially. I haven't really got back to thinking about the exact dollar value because, from the time the floods happened and then we bloody well went into COVID and we've sort of just been running ever since. But no, it's affected us. I think the one saving grace has been the fact that during COVID the online's gone crazy. So it's made us think about what we're going to do this year and how we're going to do it. But losing that corn was probably one of the hardest things for me to take because we actually started marketing a new product, which was a baby corn. So I was walking through the paddock one day and I just realised we had all this corn there and I was a bit worried whether I'd sell it all because I knew the wholesaler wouldn't be able to. So I pulled this young cob and peeled it and started eating it and thought, Jesus, that tastes all right. And it looked exactly like a corn, a baby corn you'd get out of Thailand and some out of Australia, and gave it to a few chefs and they just said, wow, and away we went. So, yeah, losing all of that was probably one of the hardest parts of it. But, it's a challenge of flood and it's just in the back of your mind all the time now.
Greg and his sister Michelle are a dynamic duo, and Dad Frank still runs the family tractor. But Greg is optimistic about the next generation as the key to moving forward.
I've got it pretty well sorted with my sister, so we work well together. She, especially at the moment, she's doing a lot of the shed work and I'm out in the paddock. One good thing is we see a lot of one another. I still, Dad's 80, but he still comes and drives the tractor and does jobs for me. So, I have a lot of contact with my parents still. Haven't seen much of Mum due to COVID, but it's just good, and we can, you're able to sit down at dinner and talk about the business, and you're never not thinking of the business. That's one thing for certain. When it's a family business, you just never switch off. That's probably a negative, but as well as a positive. Sometimes there's just too much business talk, but at least we know the history and I don't know. At this stage, we probably don't have someone who wants to take it on, but I'm not going to say we won't in the future. Any one of my children could come back, and it's pretty much a complete business now. We grow, we sell, so we're doing pretty much everything. So that it's definitely a viable business. There's no doubt about that. I don't know. I have 4 wonderful children who help us all the time but aren't actually involved in the business. We've got a few more years to go. I've got to try and save some money for a retirement fund. And look, whatever I can keep going, I'm going to keep going. I just love it. Probably the next big thing might be a big new crop of some description that people haven't seen. Hopefully this year we'll have lots of the baby corn. I know we'll have some different corns, even some different hybrid sweet stuff, straight whites, bicolours, yellows. It's just fun finding things that are a bit different that are really good to eat and have got flavour and, which, I don't know, just continue going and looking for new lines that we can potentially grow and keep people happy with.
Quality produce and life on the farm is at the heart of Greg's world, but it's the connections with people that has changed his life.
It's just good to work outside, yeah. One of my daughters did say to me, she always brings up the really, really wet days where we're trudging through mud up to our knees and harvesting stuff because it has to be harvested. That's probably about as bad as it gets, but it's still, it's still fun picking in the wet. But, and look, just everything now that we're direct marketing, seeing people, buy the produce, come back and tell you how good it is and, getting the genetics and growing them from a seed. Yeah, I just love the whole job. It has its moments, but any job does. But I'm very fortunate that I'm able to work outside with family members and able to eat whatever I want if it's ready to go. From a marketing point of view, just dealing with people. The crazy part about it is there are so many people that we actually sell produce to that I've actually never met. It's all been done on telephone or email and not necessarily delivered by me, but, and then the people you meet, just through selling, You know, some of these restaurateurs are pretty crazy dudes as well, but they're, you know, great to chat to. And just, you know, just having people come back and say, hey, that was good, you know, and we want more of it. So, you know, end of the pumpkin season, people come up and say, have you got any more? And I say, not till next season. And, you know, when they say, well, just let us know when they're there because we want more. So, you know, I think that just giving people joy with the flavour and the taste of good fresh fruit and veg, I love it all, mate.
Greg's dedication to organic farming and his commitment and focus on creating delicious food has not only been the secret to the family's longevity as farmers, but has also changed the eating habits of food-loving consumers too. This is The Producers, a Deep in the Weeds production. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we share the stories of producers, farmers, makers and growers, the true lifeblood of the food industry. Follow us on Instagram at Producers Podcast or email us at producerspodcast@deepintheweeds.com.au.